Welcome back to one last bonus episode ahead of week one here at the Most Accurate Podcast. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle. And for today's bonus episode, the guest of honor, a New York Times bestselling author, the CEO of FantasyLife.com, Roto-World's own, and of course, an Avenger. He is the great Matthew Berry. Barry, how's it going?
John, it's good. I like that it's not the John and John show. I mean, even though it is, but I like that you guys have not decided to change the name to John and John show. It is it's going, listen, as well as can be expected. Obviously, I'm adorned in Jimmy Buffett gear, obviously. Very sad about the loss of him this weekend. I'm a massive crazy fan. I know probably John felt the same way when Tom Petty went down. Obviously, I know John is a massive Petty guy. I'm a Petty fan as well. There's actually a really good Jimmy Buffett cover of Wildflowers, by the way. Which he sings to his daughter, which is, anyway, it's a live version that he did. And that's, I think, a very underrated Petty song, by the way. It just occurred to me as I was sitting there talking. But otherwise, yeah, man, gearing up. I have two drafts tonight. I have to fly to Kansas City tonight. And so my flight leaves at 6. I have a draft at 7 and a draft at 9. I have not pre-ranked my players. So I don't know how that's going to go. I'm desperately hoping the Wi-Fi in the plane works, but otherwise, it's we'll see how it goes. I've not had time to pre-rank my players.
That is the life of Matthew Berry. And as you fly to Kansas City, I'm glad you mentioned that because that's what we want to get right into. Because football somehow is only 48 hours away. Paulson and I have discussed this throughout the offseason. So let's begin with the Lions backfield, which of course is missing 96% of last year's running back touches and production. How do you think these two players, and David Montgomery and Jahmry Gibbs, will fare? Do you think they'll play together? How have you been handling them all offseason?
Well, I'll tell you, and I have said this, and I think this is a semi-controversial. I mean, both these guys made my love list, right? Dave Montgomery did, as did Jahmry Gibbs. My expectation here is that what I've said, and I think this might be a semi-controversial take, which is I prefer David Montgomery at cost to Jahmry Gibbs. That I believe, so first off, I think just kind of the easy, lazy analysis is Gibbs is going to be is going to be the Swift role, and Montgomery's going to have the Jamal Williams role. I'm not sitting there saying David Montgomery's getting 18 rushing touchdowns again, but I do think that I do think they drafted Gibbs to be a healthier, more dynamic version of what they thought they were getting in DeAndre Swift. And I do think they think David Montgomery is candidly a younger and better version of Jamal Williams. So I think they feel like they upgraded their running back room with sort of those two roles. I will tell you that anecdotally, what I've heard from people that have been at Lions camp is David Montgomery is the guy they've been using between the tackles. Like Jahmry Gibbs, my take is that Jahmry Gibbs is going to get 12 touches a game. Now, they're going to be in space. They're going to mostly be receptions, and they'll go for long plays. And DeAndre Swift, for all of his faults, was a top 15 fantasy running back on a points per game basis each of the 3 years he's been in Detroit. And so you think Gibbs is, with a little bit more help and health and maybe, a coaching staff that was all excited in the draft room to get him. So maybe, 10 to 12 becomes 12 to 14, and you get excited, right? Especially because they don't have a lot in the passing game beyond Amon-Ra St. Brown. But I just think Montgomery is like one of these boring guys. Gibbs is sexy, but no one likes boring David Montgomery, who when we look up a year from now is going to touch the ball 240 times and have 12 touchdowns. And I love both players. Both guys made my love list. But if you're asking me to pick one, give me David Montgomery at cost. And to answer your question, Daigle, how I've been treating it is I've been drafting a lot of Montgomery because Montgomery is one of those guys, as you get into drafts, that I feel like is kind of there's like a lot of what I call cheap volume in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round. The James Connors, Cam Akers, David Montgomery, Isaiah Pacheco, Brian Robinson, like a lot of these guys that I think are going to flirt with Dameon Pierce, although he's risen up somewhat. But I think there's a lot of these guys that are on, quote, bad teams or non-sexy teams that they're all going to average between 15 and 20 touches a game.
And Montgomery, fortunately for us, usually gets lost behind that shuffle of players. Paulson, have you made any week one adjustments for projections based on the recent reports of Gibbs being used, quote, in a different way? Because that could be good or bad.
Yeah, I was looking at my week 1 rankings, and those comments, it's really hard to parse what he means by them. Like, it's just we're not going to know how they're going to use Gibbs until week 1 is happening. And but I think it's fair to say that he's going to see a pretty good workload, as Matthew said, high scoring touches. And just to underline what Matthew's saying about Montgomery, I have him ranked 22, and he's going RB 30 off the board. He's been a massive value in these early drafts, or drafts all the way through August. He hasn't really moved, and that's on 11 projected rushing touchdowns. So there's some upside there as well with this excellent offensive line, excellent offense in general, and given all those touchdowns that Jamal Williams scored last year.
Yeah, I just think that. By the way, I mean, he's a guy that doesn't get hurt. I mean, I've just cursed him now, but I mean, no, this is. Seriously, Dave Montgomery. Last year, he had 15 healthy games. He got at least 15 touches. He's had at least 230 touches and 1,000 yards from scrimmage, and every year he's been a pro. By the way, 3 straight years of a target share of 11% and over 300 receiving yards. So he's not a nothing in the receiving game. Like, he's not going to be Gibbs, obviously, but he's not a complete and total zero. And so last year, Jamal Williams, 262 carries, right? We know about the rushing touchdowns, 17 rushing touchdowns, 38 goal-to-go carries. But DeAndre Swift, I don't know, DeAndre Swift played under 45% of snaps, right? And so I just think John said it, it is one of the best offensive lines of football. I think that's an underrated storyline about the Lions. And again, they lost Hawkinson. Williams is out. They're going to be a run. For as much as we love the passing offense of Goff, and I think on Thursday night they're going to have to throw to keep up with KC. Ultimately they want to run the ball. Dan Campbell wants to be we're going to bite your kneecaps off. We're rough and tough. It's the NFC North. Rah, 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 rah. Seriously, they're Montgomery's just going to be a completely boring 4 yards a carry, but 22 touches a game. He's just going to be he's going to finish low in every efficiency metric, but he's going to have, I think a lot of fantasy points. I'm with you, Paulson, in terms of just a massive value. And I have an uncomfortable amount of David Montgomery on all my teams just because I've been going, wide receivers early, and he's just always one of those guys that's always going too late.
Let's talk about the other offense in this game, because people have a lot of decisions for week 1 with Kadarius Toney being limited to start the week. And then, of course, Sky Moore and Justin Watson and Marquez Valdes-Scantling reportedly being the Chiefs' 3 starting wide receiver sets. Chiefs GM Brett Veach came out and mentioned that Rashee Rice and Justin Ross are, quote, package players. And so how have you been handling, Barry, this conundrum all offseason?
I've been mostly ignoring it, to be perfectly honest with you. I've taken some late flyers on Sky Moore.
Yeah.
But there's usually at least one person in every league I'm in that is just so slobberingly high on Kadarius Toney that I'm not willing to take it where and I get it. And listen, I will tell you, talking to my sources in Kansas City, they love Kadarius Toney. But he can't stay healthy. And now they're well, he's going to play week 1. Great. And so my guess is that they'll have a package of plays. They'll have a very specific package, and it'll probably be something, potentially in the red zone. It'll be a gadget play. And it wouldn't shock me at all if he scores a touchdown on Thursday night. Right. But I also think he probably plays less than 20 snaps. And it's just one of those things that we saw it last year. There were moments where Juju Smith-Schuster, had flashes, and every once in a while, Valdes-Scantling would catch a long one, right? But I don't know. I feel like Sky Moore is the one guy that I could, if Kadarius Toney is healthy, I don't mind a late round flyer on Toney because the upside is obvious. But in terms of how I've been handling it, I've mostly been ignoring it because Kadarius Toney goes in an area where there are safer and better flyers. He always goes too high for me. So I prefer Sky Moore at cost. And if I have a piece of the Chiefs passing attack that isn't Mahomes or Kelce, it's usually been Sky Moore. The rest of the guys I've been ignoring.
And I still get PTSD on any reports from Kadarius Toney, since that's what we received before the Super Bowl. And then he proceeded to play 6 snaps. Paulson, any adjustments for you with Toney and Sky Moore, given that we're at least expecting both to be out there?
Yeah, Tony's a tough person to rank on a weekly basis because he's so so efficient. So his yards per route run were so high. He's a threat to score a touchdown, as Matthew alluded to. So I think he is sort of startable, but then it's more of a flex wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 type play. And it depends on, who your other options are. As this offseason has worn on, Sky Moore has risen in the ranks. He's having a good camp and does look like he's going to play starter snaps. I think that's the big question with this, KC offense and his receiving core is like, who's going to be the starters? Who's going to be out there 70-80% of the snaps with Patrick Mahomes? And who's going to start garnering these targets that Juju Smith-Schuster has vacated. And I think Sky Moore is the best candidate right now to do that.
I think he's got the most talent, by the way. Cut to Thursday night when Richie James goes 6 for 70 and 2 touchdowns,
sure.
Right? You know what I mean? Like, right. But he goes around. I've seen this in drafts where he'll go and these are all guys that are rising up a little bit, so maybe not as recently, but I've seen people take Kadarius Toney over like Jordan Addison or Cortland Sutton or JSN or Quentin Johnston or Jacoby Myers, all Zay Flowers. I've seen him go ahead of guys like that or in that range where I feel much better about taking a shot on any one of those players than I do. All of them are upside plays other than Jacoby Myers, who's just kind of solid production. But I don't know. And I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I think to John's point, like, I think a year from now we'll look back and we'll be like, oh, remember those Kadarius Toney games? And we're like, yeah. But then, like, remember when you predicted those Kadarius Toney games? And you're like, no. Like, Like, they just, it's just knowing when those games are going to come are going to be really hard because, again, they just, you think, well, look at all these snaps and look at all these routes and look at all these targets. Kadarius Toney is like, I'm in on Kadarius Toney this week, and then cut to like it's like, 2 shovel passes to Noah Gray from the 3-yard line, and like you're just what are we doing?
We're all still certainly chasing that high of his 2 drives against the Cowboys as a rookie. Yeah. That's what he continues moving on. Travis Kelce, also a very important player in this game, and we don't need to talk about him. He's so important because everyone's going to start him. But Paulson and I have argued, Barry, all offseason and debated who we think the player behind him in the next couple of tiers is going to be the one who can actually overthrow him. So between Mark Andrews, T.J. Hawkinson, Darren Waller, Kyle Pitts, maybe another option off the top of your head, do you have a favorite among that tier?
I mean, I rank them exactly, Daigle, exactly how you just said. Like I have Andrews at 2, Hawkinson at 3, Waller at 4. My approach to tight end has been basically one of those guys, or I want to wait. Like I'm nervous about Kittle this year. I have no shares of Kyle Pitts, and maybe I'll be wrong. Maybe Kyle Pitts will be what we all thought he was going to be. But I just he couldn't get any targets last year, and they just added Bijan Robinson. Like, I don't know. Arthur, I don't know what Arthur Smith's going to do. But I see so many people talking up Drake London and Kyle Pitts, and maybe one of them does. But I mean, just we don't know yet that Desmond Ritter's any good. We think he's going to be better than Mariota, but we don't know for sure. The one thing I feel really confident in is that Bijan Robinson is going to touch the ball 20 times a game. And because it's Arthur Smith, I feel like Tyler Algier is still going to touch it 8 to 10. And then you add in 4 or 5 annoying touches for Cordero Patterson. And I just it's hard to me, John, when you do your predictions, Paulson, I mean, you tell me it's hard for me to find a route to seeing 8+ targets a game for both Drake London and Kyle Pitts, on what I think is going to be a slow-paced offense that is not going to be particularly pass-heavy. I think they're going to be, I think they're going to be the run-heaviest team in the NFL.
Yeah, I would say I'm not high, but I'm bullish on London. He's been playing starter snaps in the preseason. I'm low on Pitts. I'm just like you. I don't have any shares of him. I've got him at 9, so I don't ever get him at that point. I mean, I would only draft him if he fell way past ADP. And just because he's been limited in the preseason snaps, we saw what happened last year. He just wasn't that involved. I just don't have any confidence in Arthur Smith, featuring him at any measurable level to justify the ADP. So his ADP to me has been out of whack. It's just all bet on talent. And we just don't know what this role is going to be until we actually see it happen.
Yeah, exactly. I always say, one of my most used phrases is fantasy success is very simply about 2 things, talent and opportunity. We don't question Kyle Pitts' talent, but we do question the opportunity because, candidly, it hasn't been there at least relative to ADP the last couple of years. And if I'm a year late on Kyle Pitts, I'll be a year late on Kyle Pitts. But I'm just like, I much prefer Goddard. I much prefer waiting a few more rounds, like Fryer. I much prefer Freiermuth. I much prefer Tyler Higbee, who I think is going, like, again, like Tyler Higbee's going to flirt with like a 25 to 30% target share. And by the way, if this Cooper Kupp injury is more serious than we think it is right now, like he could have a 30% target share. Like last year, I think he had a 22% target share off the top of my head. So, I mean, like, I don't know. I just, but in terms of, so I have it Andrews, all this, he hasn't practiced for 6 days.
Yeah. So
Andrews makes me a little nervous for week 1, especially considering they're playing the Texans at home. I mean, the Ravens are at home, and they're 10-point favorites. Like, if you're John Harbaugh and you're just like, like, I think we could do it. You know what, Mark? Take it easy for one more. Like, if we can't beat the we can't beat the Texans with Isaiah Likely, then we're pretty screwed here. Like, so Andrews makes me a little nervous, but I have Hawkinson at 3. I have Waller at 4. If Waller stays healthy all year long, I think he's got a shot because he will be he is like Andrews and Kelce. He's one of the few guys that you can say is a tight end that legitimately has a shot to lead his team in targets, receptions, and receiving yards. Higbee, by the way, if Kupp's injury is real, is one of those other guys. But the rest of them, I guess Kyle Pitts if something were to happen to Drake London. But, like, I don't know. For the most part, there's very few guys that like you can't say that about Kittle. You can't say that about Hawkinson because of Jefferson. Like, there's, right? You're not, you don't see that about anyone else.
And to your point, as a late round tight end, yes, Higbee did lead the Rams with a 24% target share with Cooper Kupp off the field last year. Speaking of talent and opportunity, there are some major offensive changes going on in Indianapolis. We know, of course, they have the talent in Anthony Richardson, number 4 overall pick. But where do you see this opportunity flaring out to? Are you high on Michael Pittman this year? How do you think the backfield is going to be handled now with Jonathan Taylor out and unknown amount of time? What are you doing really with this offense?
Mostly ignoring it. I don't mind. I drafted Michael Pittman in a guillotine league only because I think there's a floor there with Pittman, just because he's going to get such a massive target share. And no matter how inaccurate Richardson may be, like at some point, like it's just like, but I don't like, he's not somebody I've been targeting quite a bit. Right. You know what I mean? So I think Pittman becomes a value at some point because I've seen him just drop so far in drafts. And I think he's going to, there's a level of, there's a floor with Pittman because of his talent and just what I expect the target share to be. But otherwise, like, no, like, it's just like, I don't love the offensive line. Think about this. Whatever you think of Zach Moss, Evan Hall, Deon Jackson in the Colts backfield, I think we can all agree none of them are Jonathan Taylor last year. None of them are going to be as good as Jonathan Taylor last year. Jonathan Taylor was like the 17th best running back on a points per game basis. Like, Jonathan Taylor was not Jonathan Taylor in capital letters last year. So what you have in Shane Steichen is a guy that has publicly said, we actually played the clip on my show. I just got off the air of Fantasy Football Happy Hour, which is my show that I do every day and my podcast. And we played the clip of Steichen from the podium where he just said, yeah, it's going to be a running back by committee. We're going to play the hot hand a little bit. But, he came from Philadelphia. What do they do in Philadelphia? Committee, right? Mm-hmm. It's Miles Sanders. Now it's Boston Scott. Now it's Kenneth Gainwell and Jalen Hurts, obviously. So now you've got like a coach with running back by committee tendencies. He's publicly said it's going to be a running back by committee. You don't have anyone in that backfield at the moment that demands touches. You're like, well, we've got to figure out a way to get Deon Jackson the ball all the time. And by the way, probably the best quote unquote runner in that backfield is Anthony Richardson. Like, when they're getting close, their best shot at scoring is likely Anthony Richardson on some sort of, RPO where he either keeps it or he tosses it. So, if you're desperate in week 1, I don't mind Deon Jackson. I think he'll probably be a popular DFS play, just based on his salary and everything like that. But like, I don't know, like when assuming Zach Moss is out, but you could see a scenario where Evan Hull, who was a really good pass catcher in college, and then Zach Moss, who's, they traded for last year, becomes Zach Moss and then Evan Hull on third down, and or Deon Jackson gets, I don't know. It's just, it feels desperate and chasey to me. You know what I mean? Like, I know Deon Jackson was good last year, but like in the little limited time when he filled in for Jonathan Taylor, but it just, I don't know. I don't love the vibes there.
To close that loop, Paulson, there probably are people out there who went 0 RB and they have Tank Bigsby, Jalen Warren, someone they may be trying to jam in as an RB2 just based out of necessity. But I think in that case, as Barry was mentioning, that's where Deon Jackson, that's where Evan Hull come in, because they're probably still guaranteed more touches than those two individuals who we still think have higher ceilings long term.
Yeah, this is, I mean, especially week 1 with Zach Moss out. I think if, they showed us that they liked Moss late last year. Now the wild card is Evan Hull coming in. How do they view him versus Moss? But it does seem like Moss was ahead of Deon Jackson as of last year, but he's been injured. So he's, how good a shape is he in? Yeah, Matthew.
The only thing I was going to say, Paulson, is it's a new coaching staff. It was weird last year with Deon Jackson.
That's true.
Right?
That's true.
I mean, last year, Deon Jackson filled in. He came in for Jonathan Taylor on that Thursday night game. He was great. And then the next week he played, and I think he had like 20 fantasy points, and it was like awesome. But then later in the season, they trade for Zach Moss, and Taylor's out again, and they go to Zach Moss, and Deon Jackson gets in some sort of hissy fit or something like that. There were all sorts of varying reports, but some version of Deon Jackson was upset that he's like, hey, I was good last time. Why am I not going to get start this time? And they're like, we feel Zach. I don't know. Who knows what happened? But there was clearly the old coaching staff was like, yeah, Deon Jackson, sit down. We'll start playing Zach Moss ahead of you. But so who knows? Which we don't know if Deon Jackson has a chance, because I think Zach Moss won't play week 1 and Evan Hull's a rookie. And so my guess is that Deon Jackson gets an opportunity to show that he can, quote, be the guy. So, like I said, if I had to play a Colts running back week 1, I'm playing Deon Jackson, and then we'll see what happens. But I'm not convinced Zach Moss. I'm also not convinced he's not. But I'm just saying, it was so weird last year that I think if Deon Jackson balls out on Sunday against the Jaguars, there's a chance he keeps the job. But it's still going to be somewhat of a committee. Even the whole thing.
As I mentioned in the waiver column on the site right now, Deon Jackson also hasn't handled 200 touches in any season since high school. So
right.
Yes, we are all in agreement. He's an RB3 short term, but that's why it's so complicated. And we're all talking each other in circles because he's not the type of player we want to bet on long term either, since he's never been that type of player. So it's just hard to gauge how to handle him for week 1. You also talked about Shane Steichen quite a bit there. Another problem people are having is with Philadelphia's backfield. So between DeAndre Swift, Rashad Penny, Kenneth Gainwell, who have you been taking shots on there?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, but by the way, we brought that point up. My co-host, Jay Croucher, brought up a great point. He goes, listen, we've been sitting here trying to figure out the Philadelphia backfield, and that's at least a backfield behind a good offensive line on a good offense. If we can't figure out Philly's backfield, why are we going to sit here and try to figure out the Colts backfield? Anyway, but so I have a few shares of each one of those guys, but all late, I prefer Gainwell just at cost. I don't think Gainwell probably finishes with the third amount of fantasy points. Penny and Swift are probably ahead of Gainwell, but I just think that all three are going to have a role, and Gainwell is going so far beyond those two guys that, so Gainwell, is somebody that I have some shares of. I also have some Rashad Penny. I know everyone's in on DeAndre Swift, or everyone thinks DeAndre Swift, if he stays healthy, blah, blah, blah. And Penny's reportedly running with the 4th team and, whatever. None of those guys are my starters. So it's just a matter of does one of these guys emerge? We have all seen, what you hang on to with Rashad Penny is that those final 5 weeks of 2 years ago, when he was literally the number 1 running back in fantasy down the stretch for Seattle, we were finally oh, that's the guy they spent the number 1 pick on so many years ago. And so again, behind that offensive line, if he could get Miles Sanders' workload from last year, that's a huge if. And if he can stay healthy, another huge if. It's sort of sky's the limit. My issue on Swift is they don't throw to the running back, or at least they haven't previously. That offense, they just don't. That Hurts is more likely to tuck it and run than he is to dump off to his running back. And so if Swift isn't getting passing volume, Swift got, just a massive target, off the top of my head, I want to say he had at least 45 receptions each of his 3 years in Detroit. Swift did, or each of the last 3 years in Detroit. it's hard for me to see him getting 45 receptions on the Eagles, just the way their offense we've seen the offense under Sirianni. I guess
Paulson, the onus was on you to rank them for week 1, not on me. So how did you sift through them against the Patriots?
Well, I'm still sifting. I think, Penny looks like he's the third option right now. Gainwell seems like the steady option. The thing that and I like the call that Matthew made about Gainwell with, being the third one off the board. And, he outplayed in terms of snaps, Miles Sanders in the playoffs last year. Yeah. So they do have a lot of confidence in him. I do like Sirianni wearing the T-shirts that are pro Gainwell to press conferences. I think that gives me a little bit of a boost too. But I think what's going to happen is either Swift or Penny are going to get injured. The other one's probably going to see a big workload that week. Gainwell's just going to keep chugging along with his 8 to 12 touches per game. And if one of those two are healthy, Swift or Penny, then they'll likely have the lead back role and be very productive. I mean, Penny was even early last season had a huge 2-touchdown game, over 100 yards rushing, 6 yards per carry last year. I thought heading into the season that he was going to take over that Miles Sanders role, but it just seems like they want to run Swift first, then Gainwell, and then maybe Penny coming in as the third option. But I think what's going to happen is there's going to be some attrition here, and then we're going to have some blow-up games for either Swift or Penny. And if they're both hurt, then I think Gainwell and Boston Scott suddenly look like viable starts.
And finally, Barry, we also here have discussed our favorite late-round quarterback throughout the season. And I think Paulson and I came to a conclusion, having competed in so many 12 and 14-team leagues, that Geno Smith is the one in one quarterback leagues to always fall. But if he does not, Sam Howell is then our favorite for the rushing upside. What about you beyond that top-tier quarterbacks? Who is your favorite late-round quarterback of 2023?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are some really good ones. I mean, I think Geno is perennially underrated. Not perennially, but I think I think too many people think last year's a fluke. And I don't think last year was a fluke. So I'm with you guys on that. I've seen Daniel Jones go late too. I've talked up Daniel Jones somewhat in terms of second year in the system. They've added weapons for him. I also think there's a mental piece to this in terms of, I think one thing that gets lost in a lot of fantasy football analysis is that they're players and that they're human beings. And a football team is like any other business. There are politics, there are internal politics, there are relationships, good relationships, bad relationships, just like wherever you work, wherever everyone works, there are people you like at work and there are people that you just tolerate because you have to work with them, that kind of stuff. And so that a football team is like that. And football players are human beings with egos and tempers and issues their own, right? And so I think about Daniel Jones, who last year at this time, was walking into a building that they didn't pick up his 5th-year option. It's got new bosses, right? Brand new coach, brand new general manager. They didn't do anything in the offseason. It was sort of like, listen, we think we're going to suck this year and we're not adding anything to you. And you can prove it to us, Daniel Jones, but you're literally a first-round pick quarterback and we're not picking up your 5th-year option. That's a pretty big, F you. Mm-hmm. And so he walks into the building, basically, I wonder if I'm going to have a job a year from now. Am I still going to be in the NFL? Am I going to be, looking for backups jobs, in a year? Then he goes out, has a great year, buys into Dayball's system, leads them to a playoff win on the road, gets the big contract, right? And so now he walks in a building knowing, I'm the man. This is my team. This coach and general manager have my back. And they've proven it by putting a lot of money in my pocket, right? And, oh, by the way, then they went on and they got Darren Waller and they drafted Jalen Hyatt and they added, I think, every slot receiver in the NFL's history, right? I mean, they just added a billion different guys and we'll see who emerges. But they've done some things in this offseason to try to improve this offense. So I think Daniel Jones is somebody that just goes way too late. I really like Jared Goff as well. We've talked about this. Jared Goff last year in games where he played indoors, averaged over 20 fantasy points per game. 7 of his final 8 games are indoors this year. So when you're heading to the fantasy playoffs, one of the games is a December 30th game at Dallas, so that's a retractable roof if you want to be technical, but the roof will be closed. But the expectation is 7 of his final 8 games will be indoors. So I like Jared Goff. And you guys mentioned Sam Howell. You talked a lot about Sam Howell, I'm guessing, on your show. That's my guy. I refer to him on my show as future Hall of Famer Sam Howell. Everyone thinks I'm a homer, which I am because the Commanders are, of course, my team. But because I'm so high on Howell this year, and I have a lot of shares of Howell across my leagues, they're like, "Yeah, you're just a homer, Barry." And I'm like, no, like Sam Howell had more rushing yards his senior year in college than Anthony Richardson did. Like, people don't understand that. Like, he had over 1,100 rushing yards. So, you know, and he's surrounded by a good skill set player. And I think Bieniemy's going to want to be aggressive in terms of play calling. So, you know, the McLaurin injury makes me a little nervous, but assuming health with McLaurin, Dotson, Curtis Samuel, whoever their tight end is, whether it's Cole Turner or Logan Thomas, the running backs, I'm excited about Sam Howell. But since you mentioned Sam Howell, I'll give you one other, and that's Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett, who has looked lights out this preseason, I think 13 of 15, 199 yards and 2 touchdowns as a starter this year, went 7-2 towards the end of last year. Everyone's talking about how the Lions ended the year last year. No one talks about how the Steelers ended the year. And again, same thing. Kenny Pickett, you know, can get you 20, 30 yards of rushing a game. Like, he's not Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, but he's not a nothing in the run game. We like Deon Jackson and George Pickens. I talked to Fryermuth earlier in the show. I actually think Allen Robinson, the ghost of Allen Robinson, as the slot receiver, actually is kind of interesting for Pittsburgh because I think he's a size mismatch there. Having more Jalen Warren out there, give me some Kenny Pickett. Like, that's the other guy that if I don't get Howell, that's the late round quarterback I like a lot.
No one probably needs to know. They've been living under a rock if they can't find you, Matthew Berry. But just in case, tell everyone where they can find all of your amazing work.
So, you can follow me on, on social media. I'm at Matthew Berry TMR on all forms of social media, except the Fantasy Life app, where I'm merely at Matthew Berry. And of course, my day job over there at NBC Sports, Fantasy Football Happy Hour, Monday through Friday, noon Eastern, live on Peacock, and then available on demand on Peacock, on the NFL on NBC YouTube channel, and wherever you get your podcast. This Sunday, Fantasy Football pregame, Sunday morning, 11 a.m. to 1 o'clock Eastern. We got it 11 a.m. right up to kickoff. That's on Peacock. And then, of course, Football Night in America. So I'll be in Kansas City Thursday night for the pregame show between the Chiefs and the Lions. And there may or may not be an Amon-Ra St. Brown bet. I'll just leave it that on Thursday night. And then Sunday night I'll be back in Stamford, Connecticut again for Football Night in America before the Cowboys-Giants game on NBC.
And we will be back on
and
rotoworld.com.
And all my rankings. Love, hate, 100 facts, all my rankings, 10 list of 10, draft day manifesto. It's all available for free on NBCsports.com or rotoworld.com. Your old home, John Daigle.
Absolutely. It seems like everyone's gone through there. The Belichick coaching tree of fantasy sports. And we will be back on this channel tomorrow, Wednesday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern, for our first preview show, weekly preview show moving forward. Until then, you already know. Be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you next time.